Welcome to the second episode of the Data Depot. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey Dean, and today we will be taking a look at the NBA MVP race. This has been heating up in the final months of the season. A lot of changes in who people think is the favorite for the award. In the latter half of today's show, I'll be discussing the race with guest Grant Green. So, without further ado, let's crunch some numbers. Per NBA.com, Nikola Jokic is at the top of the MVP ladder, and has been since March 19th following Joel Embiid's knee injury. Embiid has crawled his way back up to the number 2 spot and is followed closely behind by Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's the reigning back-to-back MVP. That being said, my pick for MVP isn't in the top 3 per NBA.com, but I'll walk you through the numbers and show you why this rising star is the most valuable player in the association. This determination will be made by comparing this year's top performers to the statistics of the last 15 MVPs, from Steve Nash's title back in 2006 to Giannis' second of back-to-back awards in 2020. Given the NBA is a league that values offensive dominance over stout defense, see James Harden in 2018, Russell Westbrook in 2017, Steph Curry in 2016, to name a few, the calculation will factor almost exclusively offensive performance. The 3 major elements will be their workload for the team, their straight-up shooting percentages, and their per-game averages. Workload includes the percent of games that they play, the percent of team assists and rebounds they contribute, as well as the percent of the team's scoring that the player accounts for. Shooting percentages will take into account the three-point percentage, field goal percentage, and free throw percentage. The final category will look at points, assists, and rebounds per game. The most consistent factor in the workload category is the percentage of games played. This makes sense for a variety of reasons. Durability is a key to team success, which often plays a role in MVP awarding. More on that in a few. As far as percent of games played, no MVP player in the last 15 years has missed more than 15% of their team's games. And up until James Harden in 2018, all of the MVPs since 2006 had started over 90% of their games, with 5 MVPs missing 1 or 0 games. Turning back to the team performance momentarily. 14 of the last 15 MVPs have led their team to a 1 or 2 seed in their conference. The lone exception being 2017 Russell Westbrook, whose OKC Thunder finished 6th in the West. That being said, Westbrook recorded a record-setting 42 triple-doubles on the year and earned himself the title. Furthermore, in that same season, Westbrook accounted for 30% of the Thunder's points, 23% of the rebounds, and a whopping 49.5% of OKC's assists. Now moving to shooting percentages, the average MVP player has shot 50% from the floor, 37% from 3, and 82.4% from the charity stripe. There have been 3 50-40-90 seasons in the last 15 years. This isn't much more, there's much more to this besides the fact that Steph Curry's shooting line is basically identical to his line during his first MVP season in 2014-15. Curry is shooting just shy of 50% from the floor, between 42.5% and around 450 from behind the arc, and a hair over 91% at the free throw line. Lastly, averages, which we'll take each stat one at a time. First up is the points per game. The average MVP player in the last 15 years has averaged 27.6 points per game. One Steph Curry leads the NBA in that category. However, the average MVP player is, while scoring 27.6 points, is factoring a lot more, and we'll get to that shortly. This year, Chicago's Zach LaVine is putting up the closest to 27.5 points per game. This is the closest player to mirroring an MVP candidacy in this regard. However, basketball is more than just scoring. Next up is rebounding. In the last 15 years, the MVP winners grabbed an average of 7.8 boards each game. This year, the nearest to that mark is Jason Tatum with 7.4 rebounds per game. Sophomore phenom Zion Williamson is not much further, nabbing 7.3 rebounds a game. And last up is the passing element of the game. Let's take a look at the assisting numbers over the last 15 years. The average for MVPs is at 7.1 assists per game. That being said, Damian Lillard, represented by that dot right there, is averaging 7.5 assists per game, closest to that average. All said, the player this year that is mathematically closest to being the average MVP player based on the last 15 years of MVP performance is Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks. Doncic also boasts the top MVP value of the top scorer this year. While MVP value is a metric generated by yours truly, I will walk through the math to better understand why this metric is an indicator of MVP likelihood. Let's take Steph Curry, for instance. Steph Curry is playing out of his mind this season. The two-time All-Star and three-time NBA champ is still managing to turn heads, especially so during his 11-game run wherein he averaged 40 points a game, shooting 48.6 from behind the line. Even still, Steph only has the 9th highest MVP value out of 15 players. Let's break down the math on his MVP candidacy. The MVP value is calculated using the sum of squares of each individual category. A lower sum of squares means that the deviation of a set of data is lower or closer to a given data point. In short, smaller values indicate that this player is closer to being a typical MVP candidate. This will measure how similar Curry's performance this season is to the past 15 MVPs. The formula uses the absolute distance between Curry's statistics and those of the average MVP winner. The squaring ensures that players are not punished for being below the average of past performances. Let's take a look at the workhorse portion of the value score. The formula is as follows. The difference between Steph Curry's per-game team contributions squared plus Steph Curry's contribution in rebounds, assists, and scoring, all of those individually squared, and then after that, they are added together. The average MVP player over the last 15 seasons has played, on average, in 94.5% of their team's games. They account for approximately 17% of the team's rebounds and 30.8% of the team's points. Assists. They also contribute just over 1/4 of the team's scoring. This season, Steph Curry has played in just under 87% of the Warriors' games. He makes up 13% of the rebounding, 21.2% of their assists, and a sizable 27.7% of Golden State's offense. After all the arithmetic, Steph Curry's team contribution comes to a sum of squares that is 0.017. Steph Curry's sum of squares for shooting and per game averages are 0.012 and 19.443 respectively. Minor hiccup emerges here because the sum of squares value for per game averages is much higher than team contribution and shooting percentage. This makes sense because these values are inherently much larger given they are not percentages. Therefore, if there was a straight addition of these values, players who had a more similar per game average to an MVP candidate would receive a major boost, possibly illegitimately. To counteract this, and because the MVP race is a competition between players, the MVP value takes the percentage of a player's category sum of squares of the top 15 players and divides that by the total sum of squares for that category for players in the league. For instance, the total number of sum of squares for the per game averages is 242.963. The final MVP value for Steph Curry takes his average sum of squares for per game averages and divides that by that value, 242.963. Once this has been done for all three categories, they are then summed. For Steph, that value rounds to about 0.2. To make this value more palatable and comparable, it is used as the denominator in 1 divided by x, and that value comes out to about 4.99, as we've seen before. Now that all of this math is behind us, let's revisit the list of players given the context of the math. Luka Doncic's stats have the smallest deviation from the average MVP candidate over the last 15 years. Here's the Dean's List, or the list of players with the highest MVP value. However, strict formulas aren't always enough. There are some historical patterns that can eliminate some of the players on the original list of 15 from MVP contention. First and foremost, as previously mentioned, no MVP has come from a team that is lower than a 6th seed in their conference. This eliminates Zach LaVine, whose Bulls sit at the 11th spot in the East. This moves Damian Lillard into the 5th spot, but he too doesn't play for a good enough team, as the Trailblazers are a 7th seed in the West, 1 game behind Dallas. Why is Lillard going to be removed? Well, for one, the Blazers' winning percentage with Lillard playing is 0.527. This winning percentage is 0.07% lower, 0.07 lower than their winning percentage during the 5 games that Dame has missed. In Luka Doncic's case, the Mavs have a 0.581 win percentage with Doncic in, and that number drops to 0.2 during the 5 games when Luka can't go that night. Another pattern, so we'll get rid of Lillard there. Another pattern that has arisen over the last 15 seasons is the value of assists. Only one MVP in the last 15 years, Dirk Nowitzki in 2007, accounted for less than 20% of their team's assists. This eliminates both Jason Tatum, who has the second highest MVP value, and Devin Booker, the rising sun out in Phoenix. The two contribute 18.5 and 16.7% of their team's assists. After taking those two off the board, Kawhi Leonard moves up to the 4th spot, with Steph Curry taking the 5th spot. For Curry, he has no glaring deviations from the average league MVP. However, for Leonard, he isn't so lucky. When in San Antonio, Leonard severely injured his ankle and was fastidious about keeping it in tip-top condition, even if that meant taking games off. When he spent his year up north with my beloved Toronto Raptors, the coaching staff fully embraced the practice of load management and taking games off to rest up. He has continued this in Los Angeles and has only played in 74% of the Clippers' games this year. No player, again, has won one MVP playing in less than 85% of their games. In an effort to be ready to win championships, Leonard has sacrificed his shot at winning the MVP. Even for Steph Curry in his 2016 campaign accounted for 9% of his team's rebounds. Trae Young can't even reach that mark, only contributing 8.6% of his team's rebounds. Trae Young certainly isn't the caliber of player to be able to compensate for that and become an MVP with the lowest rebound contribution since 2006. This moves Giannis Antetokounmpo into the 5th spot in his quest to be the first player since Larry Bird in 1986 to win 3 MVPs in a row. This is the final version of the Dean's List, with Luka Doncic sitting atop and my pick to win the MVP. In the purest sense of the word, Luka Doncic has shown that he is easily the Mavericks' most valuable player, as I previously mentioned, with Dallas's differing win percentage. After the break, Grant Green is joining the show to talk MVP candidates and who he thinks is going to bring home the hardware. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back to the Data Depot. I'm your host, Jeffrey Dean, and I am joined here by my guest today, Grant Green. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. I love this. I love the concept of the show. I don't know what half of it means, but it's still fun to watch.
Yeah, no, of course. So, as I previously mentioned, my pick to win MVP this year is Luka Doncic. I think he is an exceptional player who's really coming into his role as the leader of the Dallas Mavericks. He's clearly very valuable to his team. His team performs well when he's in the lineup, but poorly when he's not. What are your thoughts, and who's your pick?
Well, I mean, Luka is definitely an excellent choice. Averages 26, 8 and 8. The stats are there offensively. When it comes to MVP, there's a lot of things that go into it. There's voter fatigue, so that eliminates guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, and then there's your value, your standings in the league, and injuries, just how long you play. You mentioned that too. So for my pick, it's gonna be Nikola Jokic. And the reason why is because, first of all, the first thing I said about value to his team, he leads his team, the Nuggets, in steals, assists, rebounds, and points per game. They're all career highs, so he can get MIP, Most Improved Player, as well. And so, I mean, this is a good Nuggets team, too. They just lost Jamal Murray and Will Barton, and they're still 6-1 in their last 7 games. Jokic is proving to be a guy that the 4-seed Nuggets can rely on to be competitive against playoff teams, even without their best player. Everybody else, with guys like Luka, their stats may be there, but because Luka's a 6 seed right now, just like the slight difference in standings, I think it really sways towards Jokic's favor. Same thing with Steph Curry as a 10 seed on the Warriors, and then Embiid's missed games, and you mentioned missing games, how much that hurts MVP. So I mean, right now it makes sense for Jokic to win it, just when you factor everything, including Giannis with voter fatigue winning the last 2 MVPs.
No, absolutely. So my contention, I like your points. Nikola Jokic has played every single game, in fact, this year for the Denver Nuggets. However, and he also has the highest he's the closest. He leads his team in rebounds, as you said. Almost a quarter of the Nuggets' rebounds are collected by Nikola Jokic. However, my contention with that is that Nikola Jokic, you said it's a good Nuggets team, and I think that's to his detriment as far as MVP is concerned. You said, they've lost Jamal Murray, they've lost Will Barton, but I think that with players like Michael Porter Jr., who has stepped up huge in the absence of Jamal Murray, is detracting from Nikola Jokic's value. Granted, Luka Doncic has players like Kristaps Porzingis, but I think it is unequivocal that in the crunch times that the Mavericks are going to Luka Doncic to take that last shot, and I don't know if that can be said for Nikola Jokic. Maybe it's, obviously sometimes it goes back to skill set. Nikola Jokic plays center, and so you're not necessarily giving your center the last shot in the game. I think, however, that does impact how, the MVP voting. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I can agree with you that the Nuggets do probably have a more deeper team, even with injuries, than the Mavericks do. The only problem I have is you mentioned that no one's won a MVP as lower than a 6 seed, and the reason why is because if you're anything lower than a 3 seed or a 4 seed, you have to have a really good season. Like we look at 2017 with what Russell Westbrook did. He had literally a historical season as far as something we hadn't seen since Oscar Robertson. And I don't think that Luka Doncic, as great as he's playing, is having the same narrative and hype around just how surreal Russell Westbrook stats versus just Luka Doncic being a very complete offensive player. It takes so much to have as a team be on a team that's a 6 seed and then still win MVP, and there's a reason why it doesn't happen very often. Last MVPs have been on pretty decent teams, James Harden, Giannis, and then before that with Kevin Durant, LeBron, all those guys. They're usually on pretty good teams. It takes a pretty crazy season to win as a 6 seed. As being on a 6 seed.
Right. So I agree that, that's one of the statistics that I mentioned. One of the statistics that, I didn't happen to bring up is that no players in the last 15 years, none of those MVPs have been centers. All of them, there's been, Giannis is probably, plays the most center as any of those last 15 teams, or 15 MVPs, but, you have Giannis, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry. Then you have LeBron James and Kevin Durant, who play forwards, but still have that skill set and are still, ball handlers and are getting a lot of touches. Whereas with Jokic, I get hung up on the fact that, while he is a sensational player, I don't think he has his position does not lend itself to having the pedigree of an MVP caliber player and MVP caliber performance, because just, I think that Luka's ability to be a star and be on highlight reels with voter fatigue and stuff like that, he's an exciting player to watch, and I think that will help him when it comes to awarding an MVP.
Yeah, and I mean if Luka were to win it, I would have no issue with it. But when you mention things like centers winning, I can totally understand that, because a lot of what's been going on is the NBA really started to love the flashy 6'7" player that's just putting up big stats. I mean, it definitely changed from when David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Hakeem Olajuwon, when the big man get down the low, get down the paint, Shaq as well. That kind of era started to go away, and then so centers stopped winning the big awards. But when you look at Jokic, he's farthest away from a typical big man, despite how big he is, because he averages 9 assists a game, which is surreal for his size. He has great range. He can do it pretty much all, and he's not even he's Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid can make the 3, but he's like Joel Embiid from even better when it comes to shooting. He's not he's a big man and he can post up, but he can do also so much more. And I don't really I think it would take a lot for like I don't think that voters are gonna look at him and say like, well, he's a big man because I mean he's doing too much to ignore like just how like I mean just to ignore all this. You can't like just dispute what he's doing for this Nuggets team. But I mean, there's so many competitors this year, and I it wouldn't hurt me if someone else win it, but I just don't see like somebody could look at his stats and be like, well, he's a big man, and we like it just probably like wouldn't happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll just have to wait and see. I think it's going to be Doncic. You think it's going to be Jokic? We'll just have to wait and see how the votes are cast. It's a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.